There are big changes in store for the Marvel Cosmic Universe, but you won't believe what happened to Hal Jordan. What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. In this week's Shelf Appeal, I'm going to go over the books that I picked up this week, give you a rundown as to what they're all about, and whether there's something you should go back to the comic book shop for. To start things off, we're going to go with Civil War II, issue number 6. The feeling is that Civil War II is greatly spoiled by what happened in last week's infamous Iron Man, and you know what? You're not wrong in that. But what we really found in this is that it's a little bit more development as far as the plot's concerned, and really, I feel like this is the direct lead-in to what happens with Tony Stark in infamous Iron Man, and it might not necessarily be what people expected. What we run into is that everybody starts turning on Carol Danvers. You know, she just can't do anything right. Captain America chooses to take a stand, and we know in the background that it's Hydra Cap, but nobody else does. So he chooses to take a stand, and because of what's happened with the recent Civil Wars, man, everybody kind of falls in line behind him, which takes Carol out of the game for most part. It's just one of those things where we see this kind of fracturing, and ultimately we see Miles Morales taken off by Thor. He's nowhere to be found until at the end of the book, we all of a sudden know where SpiderMan is. I've got a few different theories about this, but I would hate to really spoil it, especially if I'm right. But I will say that some famous mustachioed and goateed hero might be masquerading. After Civil War II, the next book I want to talk about is Hellblazer issue number 3. So Hellblazer is a book that I've been picking up on the regular because I was very interested in what this kind of like dark, magical, mystical world of Hellblazer was really about inside DC Rebirth. And I found that even though I know what it's about mostly, I'm losing touch with whether I really care about it or not. The inclusion of Swamp Thing's very interesting. The fact that there's these vampires running around and that John Constantine seems to bring nothing but trouble to all of his friends. I get it, it's just not entertaining or interesting enough to continue to hold my interest, and I'm really kind of tapped out at this point as to whether it's something that I can keep picking up because I've got 20-something comic books here right now, so it's not quite enough to make the cut for me, which is unfortunate because I was really looking forward to this kind of story out of DC. When we jump from Hellblazer to the Totally Awesome Hulk, issue number 11, we see that he's still engaged in combat with Black Panther as part of Civil War II's whole tie-in, but I'm really glad to see Greg Pak mostly ignoring that and going to focus on Amadeus Cho and Maddie, but I feel like for this series, the damage has already been done. There was a really good amount of momentum, when Amadeus Cho really kind of burst onto the scene where he had Frank Cho as the artist and he was kind of fighting all these monsters, and he ended up going against Fing Fang Foom, and then this monster huntress is going to take him as her own prize, and then the Enchantress got involved, and then all of a sudden Civil War II happened, and it felt like Greg Pak's vision for where the Hulk was going was completely derailed. Because if this story had taken place immediately after, I would be totally on board with it, but right now it just feels like he has to, falsely deal with this grief that has kind of overcome him and kind of blocked him from being perceptive of where he is character-wise. His emotions are running rampant. And what we saw was that Amadeus was a very controlled person, except when the Hulk takes over, and we've pretty much ignored the entire Hulk persona as a secondary person, as a character within a character, and we're kind of just in this grief stage, and I really want this to get back on track with where that was, because that was a really interesting character development and a development regarding the aspects of the Hulk that we haven't really explored before. Not necessarily something I can recommend jumping onto at this point in time, but I really hope that Greg Pak finds his stride and brings us back to a very clear-cut version of what Amadeus Cho is really dealing with as far as his adventures as the Hulk. We're going to stop over in Batgirl number 4. So Batgirl number 4 introduces us to the Teacher, and the Teacher isn't really as menacing as what you would think. She makes her way back via plane, and there's a lot of different development between her and Frankie, her friend, and all that kind of stuff. And what we find is that the Teacher is really looking to get this smart enhanced drug. I feel like it's just a little underwhelming. It's a little lackluster at this point in time, and that Babs really needs to get back to Burnside and start dealing with a little bit more street-level scum and scrum kind of stuff. This globetrotting thing would have been way better, in my opinion, if there was a bit more mentorship and it was dealing with her character development, not necessarily her fighting crime in various countries. It's making it tough for me to keep this on the pull list, but I'm going to stick around for the last issue for the conclusion of the first arc, because That's what I gotta do. And then one of the big surprises for me is Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps number 7. So this has been an ongoing story arc that has really led up to this clear-cut point in time. If you read Green Lantern's Rebirth, which was an overall great issue where we saw the reemergence of Hal Jordan, he basically forged his own ring out of sheer willpower so that way he could take off and become the Green Lantern, and it immediately threw him into conflict with the rest of the universe, which was under the control of the Sinestro Corps, which had that had just turned to fear in order to dominate everybody. And then we saw the resurgence of the Green Lantern Corps, and this really kind of culminates in this final act, and I love the fact that it's Hal Jordan versus Sinestro on Warworld, basically on their own, fighting to see who survives, like whose power is superior. And Sinestro has control over the Parallax Force, and Hal Jordan is an embodiment of living will, and then all of a sudden everybody's evacuated, and we don't really know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen with your man Hal Jordan, and I don't want to spoil it for you guys, but if you've been following on at all, this could be really, really cool. And you might not see Hal for a little bit. Just going to put that out there. Definitely recommend going back and checking it out if you want to keep up with where the Green Lanterns are out in space and not necessarily with Jessica Cruz and Simon Baz, who are still primarily based around Earth. That was a good one for Green Lantern fans. Once we get done with the Green Lanterns, we drop over to Descender number 16, and Descender number 16 gives us the backstory of Driller and his friend Scoops. And this is a very heartwarming kind of tale about friendship between two robots and what they yearn for. They were mining bots and they were top of the line when they were there the first time, but then ultimately they shortly get passed over for new technology, which is, it happens with our phones, it happens with our computers. But it shows how they kind of bonded over the idea that they wanted to be something more than that. And then when they were mistreated, that's when Driller became a killer. And it was just like, it was so justified on his part for how he was being treated, but you feel bad because it causes a loss for somebody else that's also a main character, and there's just so much going on. And I love that Jeff Lemire is kind of writing this twisted, intertwining kind of story that just follows along this main pathway, and everybody kind of comes at it from their own different angle. It's a great story, definitely something that you guys should read. If you haven't read it yet, go grab a trade, see if it's something that you're gonna kind of fit with, because I really enjoy where this thing's going. Another book I really enjoy where it's going is Wonder Woman number 9. So Wonder Woman number 9 is almost to the conclusion of the first character arc of The Lies. We saw the resurrection of Barbara Minerva. She's no longer the Cheetah, and now she can kind of assist Wonder Woman on her hunt for Themyscira. And what we come down to is, this is a kind of a joiner piece. It shows the conclusion of the first arc where we've got our god, which is now Plant and all that kind of stuff. You've got Barbara Minerva kind of going in there and whatnot, but there's also some throwback references to the Year One story. So it's very interesting to see where this one's kind of heading up. But the conclusion is that Wonder Woman is still, pretty big fan of Steve Trevor, and she's got a pretty good idea how to get home. This was 9, 10 is a Year One, and then 11 is going to be the next pickup of this particular story where we see the conclusion of the Lies arc. One of my favorites, just because it's doing that kind of dual storytelling. One of my favorite books right now happens to be the Ultimates. So in Ultimates 12, we are seeing the deconstruction of the team. So if you remember the events of Civil War II, or if you've read the events of Civil War II, you know that the Triskelion is in shatters. There's a whole lot of that has to be done, and ultimately the Ultimates have been disbanded at this point in time, and we're seeing the transition of Carol and the various other characters into other places. And I think that this book is great because the epilogue is super interesting, because we see the resurgence of Galactus, the Lifebringer, and then we also see Connor Sims and what his new role in the Ultimates book for next month, which is a new series, is going to be. There's also this new group that's introduced at the end that has a little bit of a legacy in Marvel. They're basically the replacements, I guess, for these things, and Galactus is just like, nope, that's totally not cool, we're not gonna... These people just don't have the kind of scope that they need. So it's going to be interesting to see what Al Ewing does with this whole cosmic-y goodness, because he is great at this, and this is probably one of my favorite books because it's just a little bit outlandish, and I recommend that if anybody wants to pick up the Ultimates and know more about the cosmic world, definitely do that. This is probably one of the better books to tie into the Secret Wars conclusion and where Jonathan Hickman was really going with that. highly recommend that you guys pick it up. A whole lot of fun and definitely an enjoyable read. Now we're going to hop back to Action Comics 966, and in Action Comics 966 we see a little bit more father-son time than we have out of Action Comics. Superman's out there, he's teaching his son to utilize his superpowers, which now include supervision, because he can see a space station from the surface of the planet. He's also ridiculously fast, like full-grown Superman kind of fast, running his way home, not necessarily flying, so because he can't fly yet. So there's a few different things. We don't necessarily know the scope and scale of John's powers, but ultimately he's still a 10-year-old kid, and he misses his mom when his mom is out to work, because Lois is still at the Daily Planet or in Metropolis confronting Lana Lang, who's Superwoman. So there's a lot of continuity crossover that's happening right now. It's a good read, it's fun, but the interesting thing is a character introduction at the end by the name of Zane, and it ties into the whole Godslayer thing that was happening a few issues ago. I'm really stoked to see where Men of Steel, which is the next story arc, is going to really tie into. I feel like there's going to be a lot more of that bang up, shoot 'em up, beat 'em down action that was really great about the first arc of Action Comics. Once we finish at Action, we're going to go over to The Flash, number 9, which is the Wally West of Two Worlds, which is a classic cover that's been ripped off a few different times, but in this one it's really nice. The first thing I have to say about this book is that if you've been following along with the series, the art is just like, poof, oh my god, what the hell just happened? Because it feels so different. Not necessarily in a good way, because I like the kind of kinetic, frantic pace that was going with the previous art, and this just kind of puts me a little bit off. But the interaction between Wally West and Wally West is really cool. He definitely shows his skills as a mentor. And the big thing is that there's a lot more DC Rebirth tie-ins in the Flash book than there was in the Titans book this week. So this was your place to go if you wanted a little bit more development in that. And Wally West even references the events of Titans in the end of this issue. The Speed Force seems to operate outside of the current universe. And if the current universe is being controlled, then the Speed Force is acting in opposition to Dr. Manhattan or whatever entity is controlling this aspect. So that's a very interesting play, and I'm really glad that Joshua Williamson really introduced that, and that's probably how Wally West was resurrected. So this is tying into that overall motif from DC Rebirth back in May, and really kind of making sure that we still stick to where the storyline's going and how the Flash series is going to progress that further. Speaking of Wally West, we're going to hop over to Titans number 4. So this is usually my DC Rebirth Easter egg book, but this is primarily dealing with Kadabra's plot for Wally West. So while Wally is still, the main focus point primarily of DC Rebirth, in this book, this is really about how Wally may or may not survive this encounter with Kadabra because he's going to overexert himself. It was a little slow, it was a little bit weaker in its overall scope, but I like the maniacal portion that Kadabra really shows here. Like, his character definitely seems a little bit more evil and definitely a bit more of a mastermind in this particular plot setting, and that's great. I like to see him as kind of a really strong villain counterpart to where the Titans were, where he seemed a little bit more jokey and hooky when everything started off, but he's really pushed himself to be a much better adversary than what I expected. So overall, Titans is still a great read and highly recommended. Another book that's a great read and highly recommended is Deathstroke. So Deathstroke number 5 picks up where we left off in the last issue, where Deathstroke basically kidnaps Damian Wayne, who's Robin, and then Rose is kind of set to meet up with Batman so that way it's just a really good explanation of Deathstroke as perceived by everybody else. Rose has got this different perception, and Batman knows exactly what Deathstroke is doing. He's like, yeah, he probably sent you here to distract me so that way he can fake out somebody else. He already knows who put the hit out on you. He put you here to get you out of the way, to make this other person think that you're not there, so that way he loses, he drops his guard, so that way he can take him out without any kind of issues. And really, I should probably just leave you in the car all the time while Batman goes around and does all his awesome stuff. And that's almost exactly what happens. And then we see, the whole situation with Damian Wayne and Deathstroke and the whole counter-punch kind of conversation that they had, which was awesome. And then ultimately it was just like, it was just everybody understanding that Deathstroke does what he does, and they know exactly how he does what he does, and yet he still gets away with it anyway, because he's that good. So I'm really a huge fan of this, and I can't recommend it enough. It's a really long story arc, but highly recommended that you check it out if you haven't already. And while we're getting towards the end of one story arc in Deathstroke, we're going to get at the beginning of another one in Detective Comics 943. So in Detective 943, we're starting the Victim Syndicate, and this one starts off hot and heavy because Lucius Fox has been attacked inside a Wayne Enterprises building, and there was a sign, a giant marquee of Wayne Enterprise that was defaced, and it says, "No more," and it's got the Bat logo for Batwoman. And by the end of this, we see an introduction of what is going to be the Victim Syndicate. They've all got their own different characteristics, and I wasn't able to place a whole lot of the villains that were part of this, so I hope I get a little bit more backstory in those things, or I've got to do a lot more research when it comes to that stuff. I really like the way that this is going, and ultimately, compared to Batman, like, Kate is a rock. She, like, emotionally, she is controlled, she is precise, she knows exactly what she's doing when she's doing it, and James Tynion is writing her as a very strong character. You know, the center of this book is not Batman. It's a Batman book, but it's Batwoman. Batwoman is just like, she is the person of interest in this entire story, at least until Batwoman gets her own book in 2017. But right now I'm going to enjoy where this one's going, and the Victim Syndicate seems like it's going to be really interesting. You know, if the first arc is any indication, it's going to be a really stellar ride, so stick around for Detective Comics. Night of the Monster Men was a bit of an aberration. You know, it was a tangent that we went off of, and now we're back on what we know is going to be a really good Batman story. And speaking of good stories, Seven to Eternity. Seven to Eternity is real good. Because what Rick Remender does is basically corrupts your idea of your childhood. So what we see Adam, who's kind of out there with his father Zeb, and he goes out into the community for the first time, and he doesn't realize what's going on. He doesn't understand how the Whispers work, which is us as the characters are learning as Adam learns about these kind of things. And that's how everything gets worked in as far as the exposition. It's very natural in the story. And ultimately, it's just like, this kid, he's got his toy, and he gives it to this girl. He's just like, yeah, she makes a lot of them, but you can have that one. And then she gives him a kiss on the cheek, and she comes back later on in the story when they're facing off against the Mud King and everything like that. And there's like a metal-jawed dinosaur thing that's got people coming out of his stomach, and they're Mosics, and there's this giant fight, and oh my god, what the hell's going to happen? And that's the craziness that is Seven to Eternity, and that's why I really appreciate it, because there's this very intricate and delicate story that's being told at the beginning of this, and it can just break into nonstop action. And then there's also these various aspects of this book where it's definitely dealing with morality and sensibilities and things like that. So Rick Remender dumps a whole bunch of stuff into this book. It's very dense, it's very thick, and I love it. It's great, and then Jerome Opna does a great job with the art. I can't recommend Seven to Eternity enough. It's just stellar. I'm super on board for this one. And while I'm super on board for Seven to Eternity, I'm going to have to hop off the Arenado Jones train, at least until Season 2 comes out, because this is the end of Season 1. So this is the conclusion to the first story arc that Kara Andrews had, and it has everything that you would expect from a Arenado Jones title. Gratuitous violence, gratuitous nudity, sex, blood, and a surprise ending that you weren't necessarily anticipating. One of the characters that I was hoping for considerable amounts of development from, we don't know the consequences of that, and we're not going to find out until spring while he's on hiatus. So, Arenado Jones is always fun, but man, the mature content just keeps ratcheted up in this book. Completely unexpected, a little bit out of the blue. Nothing too terribly crazy, but definitely not a book you're going to buy for your kids. That's for sure. There's definitely an underlying message that goes and that can resonate with certain kinds of people, but you got to understand that this is the journey of a man. You know, it's a journey of a person that is trying to suss out the evil that is behind the money. He's not fighting against money, he's fighting against the evil that is hidden behind the money. It's one of those things where there's many, many layers that's hidden under naked sushi and odd sex bots. So it goes a little far sometimes. And another book that came to its end was The Vision. So The Vision number 12 is a comprehensive tie-up of everything. We see the introduction of a new character that was kind of in the story in issue number 7, and we see really a great conclusion to this overall arc for Vision and the Vision's family. You know, Virginia makes her amends, or at least she feels like she makes her amends, and that's a really cool situation for her to have that kind of realization, and ultimately take comfort in her husband, who, you always question the kind of emotional attachments that these synthezoids have, whether they actually have emotional attachments, and the kind of self-sacrifice that they put into those things, the reactions that they get, the fact that she killed the dog was just like, okay, cool, there's a whole hell of a lot that goes into this book, and I'm I'm really glad that this is the conclusion. You know, it's not a book that I'm going to recommend you go grab. You can't grab this one and be happy. Grab number 1 and go all the way through, or grab a trade or a hardcover, whatever the hell you can grab that gets you the whole story. Read it in one sitting and you're going to be really happy, because it's probably the best book that Marvel put out all year. But now that we're done with the regular titles, we're going to hop over to some new number 1s. And the first one I want to talk about is Doctor Strange and the Sorcerer's Supreme. So this is a book that, you know, even they address it in the end of this book. They're like, okay, you know, this isn't just about the Doctor Strange movie that's coming out. There's a brand new story that they want to have told, and that's what the editor is really talking about in this overall thing. And it doesn't have the same kind of feel that Jason Aaron and Chris Bachalo's Doctor Strange has, but that's because it's written by Robbie Thompson. It's one of those things where if you have a passing interest in Doctor Strange and you want to know about the magical and mystical aspects of the Marvel Universe, definitely grab it, because it's going to give you a little bit more information on that while also giving you your Doctor Strange fix. Prowler number 1 is definitely, it's not for everybody. And it's not for everybody not because it's got weird content or anything like that. It's just that you need to be very invested, or you need to have specific interest in Prowler as a character, which is, you know, it's what a self-titled book is. But this self-titled book is trying to ride on this clone conspiracy saga that's going on. And Hobie Brown just doesn't carry that kind of weight. He's a half-filled cup, man. He doesn't have that full bucket. You know, he's a little lightweight in terms of what kind of story potential there is. You get these various other kind of clues that go into the clone conspiracy, which is my main reason for picking up this book. But if I was to look at this book as a standalone issue as to whether it's something that I would come back to, not being a SpiderMan fan, there's really not a whole heck of a lot that drives me. And even the last page reveal, it needs context in order for that to be something desirable. I know what it's supposed to be. I just really hope that they're not trying to pin too many hopes on this, and it's really just going to be kind of like a mini-series to tie in with the clone conspiracy and the Dan Slott stuff that's going on, and I hope that it serves it a little bit better as we kind of move forward. But let's jump on to something else that's considerably more fun, and that is Teen Titans. So Teen Titans number 1 is the last book that I'm going to be talking about today, and it is a very good ride. It's super fun, and we get a little bit more backstory as to why Damian really set out on this venture to begin with. So it's really recapping the parts that led up to Teen Titans Rebirth and then the aftermath of Teen Titans Rebirth. And I'm totally going to buy into it because it was a really fun read to go through those things. And then we finally get this conclusion where, you know, there are people that are at Ra's al Ghul's disposal that are looking to prove themselves, and they are just going to have to prove themselves against the Teen Titans, which have newly reformed. And in order to honor Tim Drake and to become the super team that they're really meant to be, Damian is challenging. He's not like asking, he is challenging them. He's daring those people to stick around and become the team that he knows that they can be. So I'm really happy with where this plot line is going to go. I'm not sure where the art development is going to go, because I see the kind of inspiration is by John Boy Myers. The art credits is a little weird, and I know that there's different artists that are coming on for the next few books, so that's probably one of the biggest things that may or may not change in this respect. So we'll see where that one goes, but highly recommend going to check out Teen Titans number 1. It's really fun in the same vein that Teen Titans Rebirth number 1 was really fun too. So those are all the books that I picked up this week, and as well as what I thought of them and a little bit of a breakdown as to what they are. But I want to know what you guys grabbed too. I know that I missed a few books that I was going to plan on picking up, but I only have so much money and so much time. So hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you thought about other books that you picked up, as well as what you thought about the other books that I read. So feel free to hit me up down there and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe right there to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.